Today we're going to talk about seeding and transplanting in a garden hothouse. To successfully grow melons in a cool climate, choose early maturing varieties. Choose melons with a maturity date of 75 or fewer days. A 75-day maturity means that melons will mature in 75 days after a 4-week-old transplant has been planted out in the garden. With some experience, you'll be able to grow melons up to 80-day maturities. But start with the early maturing ones your first time. The best time for seeding melons in southern Alberta is the middle of May. If you seed between May 10th and May 27th, that will give you enough time to mature those melons. Now before May 10th, start preparing for seeding by looking at the forecast. When you see 3 or more sunny days in a row, that's a good time to plant your watermelons, cantaloupes, or whatever you're seeding. When transplanting melons or tomatoes or peppers, wait until the May long weekend or until there's no hard frost in the forecast. A hard frost would be -3 or more. A garden hothouse will give you 1 to 2 degrees of frost protection. You'll find 6 planting holes in the garden hothouse in the black mulch sheet. The optimum number of plants to grow in a hothouse is 4 melons, or 4 tomatoes, 6 peppers, or 12 cucumbers. Now when you're planting melons, plant 5 seeds to make sure that you're going to get 4. Sometimes the seed won't germinate. If for some reason only 3 melons germinate, that's still okay. What will happen is you'll get bigger melons, just fewer of them. If you only get 2 melons germinate, then go to your local greenhouse and buy a couple of transplants and put them in. With cucumbers, if you get 8 or more cucumbers up, that's great. They will be very productive. Now, if in your garden you have clay soil, or the soil usually crusts, it will help the emergence of your seedlings if you take a handful of potting soil and mix it into the soil at the planting hole. That's going to loosen up the soil and make it easier for those seeds to germinate. Now you want to plant the seeds just a ½ inch deep. That makes it easier for the seedlings to emerge. I like to grasp the seed between my thumb and my pointer finger, and then just work that into the ground a little bit, that ½ inch. And cover the hole that you just made and the seed with the soil surrounding the hole, and then pat that to firm up the soil contact between the seed and the soil, so the seed can absorb the water from the soil. In the case of cucumbers, when you're going to be planting 12 in those 6 holes, plant the 2 seeds in each hole about 1 inch apart. Now once you're done planting all the seeds, give them a good soak of water. Run the water on the black plastic near the planting holes, but not directly on the planting holes because you don't want to wash out those young seedlings. Even if you're using drip lines, water those seeds the first time from the top using a garden hose. Now with the heat from sunny days, the melons are going to germinate in about 6 to 8 days. Without a hothouse, it usually takes up to 2 weeks, and sometimes the seeds don't even germinate because they will rot before they germinate. Now when they emerge, the young plants are going to have 2 rounded leaves. And they'll poke up with those leaves, and then they'll open up in a day or so after they emerge. Inside the hothouse, they're going to be protected from wind and light frost, and their growth rate will be much more rapid than if they were outside. Now, as you look at this photo, you'll see some smaller cantaloupe plants and some big ones. The big ones were grown in a garden hothouse, and the small ones were grown outside without a hothouse. What a difference. 4 weeks after seeding, melons will start to send out their vines. Prior to that, they form what's called a rosette, where the leaves are all kind of in a circle. Now, after about 7 weeks, the melon plants will start producing blossoms and then set fruit. Depending on the maturity date you selected, and also the summer's heat and sunshine, you'll be picking melons in about 5 to 7 more weeks after that. With cucumbers, you'll be picking cucumbers 3 weeks earlier than usual. And that's because of the rapid growth inside the garden hothouse. That essentially doubles your picking season. Now let's talk about transplanting. Transplanting can get your melons fruiting 1 to 2 weeks sooner. And that also increases your picking season by a couple of weeks, which is important. Doesn't seem like very much, but in our short growing season, that might make the difference between having ripe melons or not. So the later maturing varieties will be a benefit to having transplants. Melon transplants should be at the 2 to 4 true leaf stage. That means that after they merge with those 2 little round leaves, then they'll grow other leaves, 2 to 4 other leaves. So that will be what's called the true leaves coming out. If you let your transplants grow a long time before putting them out and they're old, they usually don't have the vigor that younger transplants will have. Now the holes in the black mulch sheet have a slit going right through them so that the hole can be opened up wider for transplanting. You can scoop out the soil with your hand or a small hand trowel. When you're going to put your transplant in, leave it in the pot that it's in first. Dig your hole, put the pot, and see if the transplant will be just a little bit deeper than the soil surface. Because you want to place that transplant just a little deeper than it was in the pot. Now ensure your transplants are good and moist before transplanting, but not so wet that the soil is going to slough off the roots. Here we see a tomato being transplanted. And this is typical of what you would do with any transplant. Put the container near the hole, then remove the plant from the container and place it in the hole, trying to keep all of the soil on the root ball. Push some of the soil from the adjoining ground on one side of the root ball and gently push the soil from around the whole root ball into the hole to cover the transplant. And like I said, just a little bit deeper than it was in the pot. Now lightly pack the soil around the root ball and then firm the soil a little more. This is very important. Water the new transplants immediately after transplanting. That's going to settle the soil around the roots and give them the water they need and help reduce any transplant shock. Melon plants often will die if the roots are disturbed. So if the roots get broken or the soil falls off, exposing the roots, there's a pretty good chance that plant will die. That's one reason melon transplants are often grown in peat pots, because then you plant the whole pea pot along with the roots. Now I found that if you grow melons in a peat pot, it's good to soak the whole peat pot before transplanting the transplant. If the peat pot has a lip on it that sticks above the soil in the peat pot, when you plant that in the soil itself, if that lip is sticking out of the soil, it's going to wick water away from the transplant. So use some scissors and cut the peat pot along the soil line in the peat pot. That way it won't wick water away from the transplant. Something I like to do is tear 2 strips, one on opposite sides, about an inch and a half long, from the peat pot, about in the middle of the peat pot. So 1 tear on each side. What that does is it allows the roots to grow more freely and get off to a good start. Then place the peat pot in the soil and push the soil around the peat pot. Firm the soil around the pot by lightly pushing on it. Make sure that you cover the entire peat pot so that it doesn't wick that water away from the young plants. Water the plant in well, because you're going to need to settle the soil around the peat pot, making sure that there's good contact. And again, providing water for the young plant starting out. Good job. You're on your way to growing your own melons. Should be an exciting time. Tomatoes and peppers are much more forgiving when transplanting. They rarely die as a result of transplanting. Their roots can take a little bit more abuse, I guess. Following the same procedures you did for the melons, keep as much of the soil on the roots as you possibly can. Now, when you're buying transplants, your peppers or tomatoes, look for dark green leaves and thick stems. Those are usually your best transplants. Now, if you've grown tomato transplants and you have pretty long stems, you can increase the strength of that plant by planting the tomato in a bit of a trench, putting the roots in the ground and laying the gangly stem in the trench, and then bring the tomato plant somewhat upwards so it's somewhat straight up and down, but without breaking it, and then cover that with soil. The tomatoes will root all along that stem, adding to your root ball, and give strength to what would have been a gangly tomato plant. There, now your plants are off to a great start, and your garden hothouse is going to give them the heat and the humidity that they like to grow quickly. So enjoy your gardening adventure using your garden hothouse, and enjoy the fruits of your labor.